Welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple.
Woo!
Thanks, Rita. Thank you for coming.
Yeah!
Thank you, Rita, and everybody. I'm delighted to welcome tonight Rebekah Bergman for the release of her novel, The Museum of Human History. Rebekah is joined tonight by our unofficial Green Apple writer-in-residence, Rita Bullwinkel. Let's give a hand for both of them. Thank you. I'm so glad to have you both here. And Rebekah, congratulations. This is very exciting. We're delighted to welcome you to the Bay. I appreciate you all joining us both in person and online. Hello, online audience. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We are on unceded Ramaytush land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to try and land acknowledgement into action by donating either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. I have very brief business before we get to the heart of the hour. First, now is a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. I would say that picture taking is encouraged, but you can always ask our authors if that is okay. Encouraged. We got thumbs up. Please do check out our full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you're currently attending, and this week alone is pretty great. The restroom is behind us. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. It's available for attendees of our event during event time, just because it's the one place like off the sales floor that my colleagues have that is to themselves, and we try and respect like that boundary. So thank you for being cool about it. We have books from both of our authors available for purchase at the front register. You can find them there, and I think it's safe to say that they would sign copies afterward, which is very exciting. If you've been here before, you've definitely heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you also support the authors who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Special announcement this evening. If you ask a question during Q&A, we have this Museum of Human History enamel pin that could be yours. I think we have enough for almost everyone here to have their own, so no need to elbow or jab or do anything. We don't need to fight. I think we do have enough. So if that is the incentive that you need to ask our authors a question, that's your incentive. You get a pin out of it. And they're really beautiful, and I love book swag, and we all get to take a little goodie home, which is very exciting. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the authors who are joining us tonight. First, Rita Bullwinkel is the author of the collection Belly Up, which garnered both the 2022 Whiting Award and the 2018 Believer Book Award. Bullwinkel's writing has been published in Tin House, The White Review, Conjunctions, Bomb, Guernica, and elsewhere. Both her fiction and translations have been nominated for Pushcart Prizes. She is an editor-at-large for McSweeney's, a contributing editor for Noon, and the creator of Oral Florist. She is also author of the forthcoming novel Head Shop. Let's give a hand for Rita Bullwinkel. And last but most certainly not least, Rebekah Bergman's fiction has been published in Joyland, Tin House, The Master's Review Anthology, and other journals. She lives in Rhode Island with her family, and her novel, The Museum of Human History, is the reason we are here tonight. So please welcome Rebekah Bergman.
Thank you everyone for coming. Can you hear me okay? Great. So I'm just going to read a really short excerpt from the book. There's not much you really need to know. I'll just say the book centers on a girl who falls into a coma and stops physically aging and kind of follows a whole bunch of people who are pulled toward her. And the section I'm reading is from chapter 6, which begins 10 months before that accident. And she's an identical twin. Important context. All winter, the harbor was empty. When spring came, the fishing boats appeared again, like birds flying home from the south. The girls would fall asleep with a certain number of boats on the horizon, and when they woke up, there would be more. It didn't matter how early they woke up. The boats beat them. They used to count these boats with their mother at Rocky Beach. but they had never considered the fishermen who brought the boats there, undetected, every night. No one sees the fishermen, their father said. Why not? They asked. Fishermen are like the tooth fairy, he said, simply. Their father was teasing them, they knew. He was getting back to himself, slowly, although he was still, what was the right word? Was there a word that meant both dreamy and sad? By the start of summer, the horizon was dotted with boats everywhere, bobbing and facing up the hill toward their yard. Their father liked the view of them. Like a postcard, he said. Despite themselves, the girls came to fear the fishermen. It was a small fear, but it was constant. The boats seemed to stare right at them. The girls could easily imagine the whole fleet freeing themselves from their buoys and washing up the hill onto their lawn. The ghostly fishermen stepping out of those boats and saying in one deep voice, "Here we are the fishermen, and we're here." Also, there was how their mother used to love counting the boats, and then she had disappeared into the harbor along with them. The girls had seen their mother the night that it happened. This was a secret they never talked about, but they had watched from the window as she swam out into the ocean. After that, they never saw her again. So any one of the fishermen could have been the one to find her. Or maybe a fisherman killed her? Nobody had explained to them how it had really happened. They both wanted and did not want to know. Why do boats need names? His daughters had asked. For a fisherman, he said, a boat is like a pet. Some boats had joke names. Midlife Crisis was Lionel's favorite. The girls preferred the boats with names like people. Kevin appeared late in the season and was gone for a weekend before he returned. "Kevin is back," they yelled. "Did you say hello to Kevin?" "Hello, Kevin," he said stiffly, which made the girls giggle. He sometimes had the sense that they were humoring him. Kevin was a very plain boat. Lionel had once looked up boat in the girls' illustrated dictionary, and the picture looked exactly like Kevin. He took the page to them and showed them the resemblance. "No," they said, becoming hysterical. "That doesn't look like Kevin at all." Why was that so funny? He didn't know, but he laughed too. So maybe he was the one humoring them. Maybe they all humored each other. Maybe that was all a family was, in the end. The girls liked Kevin, but there was a boat they liked even better. Fish Magnet. That one was hilarious. They could not even properly be afraid of the fisherman who owned it. In some moods, they couldn't even say the name Fish Magnet without erupting into laughter and spit. "Fish Magnet," one sister yelled as she ran back and forth through the sprinkler. It was completely random. "Fish Magnet," her sister echoed, taking her turn. She had recently started copying everything her sister did. She had given up any attempt to be different. It never worked. Not really. They would always be identical. They walked away from the sprinkler and went to the fence so they could gaze out at her. There she was, moving up and down, gently. "Fish Magnet," one sister whispered. It never got old. The sea around her glistened as if winking at them. They thought of their mother, and they fell silent. Things were funny until they weren't anymore. The day she died, they awoke to the small noise of their mother's footsteps in the kitchen. They got out of bed without saying anything and sat at the top of the stairs. It wasn't yet morning. She was wearing a bathing suit that had pants and looked like it was made of sealskin. Why? She drank a glass of tap water and some cold coffee from a jar she kept in the refrigerator. They did not think she knew they were there, watching her, but right before she walked out the front door, she turned around. She waved up the stairs at them. They waved back. She put a finger to her lips and nodded. "Quiet," she was telling them. They made the same gesture and nodded back. "We will be quiet," they meant. She blew them a kiss. Just one kiss. They were meant to share it.
Oh my goodness, Rebekah, it is such an honor to be here with you and talk about this brilliant book, which I have been so excited to read for so long. The speed with which I ripped open the galley, you wouldn't believe it. And I'm so excited to talk about it that you'll forgive me. I've composed just some questions on a page, Okay, so the first thing I wanted to ask you is, I think of this book as a kind of fairy tale if there were fairy tales about the opioid crisis in biotech. Do you see this book as a fairy tale? What role or influence did the form of the fairy tale have over how you wrote the book? And I will add that the book starts with an epigraph from Briar Rose, and there's just like references to brothers
on fairy tales, and the epigraph is sort of meant to clue the reader into that. I think there's like probably two main ways that I think fairy tales served a role. The first was like structurally. I drafted this, the first time I wrote it, it was not a novel, or at least most of the way through it wasn't a novel. I was drafting it as linked stories, and I thought that that's what it would be in its final form. And then late in the game, it sort of like revealed itself to be more linked than not, and kind of wanting to be telling a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. But I had never even tried to write a novel before, really, and I needed a structure. And I was thinking about having this sleeping girl at the center, and it seemed like Sleeping Beauty or Briar Rose would be a really good sort of like structure to hang things along. And so that was the first way that I tried to use it, and the first role that it served. And then the more I wrote and the more I kind of thought about the role of fairy tales, I also, the book has a lot to do with memory. I think the questions that it's asking are all about like the role of memory in our lives, and the importance of memory, and the fragility of memory, and memory itself as a kind of story. And I think fairy tales are kind of the perfect sort of thematic encapsulation of that, because we all know a version of Sleeping Beauty, and every time we tell it, it's kind of, we're remaking the story. And like the work of fairy tales is sort of like this preservation of a past. And it might not be the past that happened, but it's the story that's told about it, which is the same thing that our memories are in a way. So yeah, I kind of really liked that I sort of landed on this fairy tale outline as my form. I also read this essay early on by this fairy tale scholar named Donald Haas.
I don't know Donald Haas.
He's an advisory member of the Fairy Tale Review, which is a literary magazine.
Wow.
And anyway, the essay was about the role of memory in Sleeping Beauty, and it just, reading that essay like opened up a lot for me, because there's a girl who's asleep and she's kind of perfectly preserved, and the only way she is reawoken is by the kind of classic grim version of the story, by like someone who remembers her story, and they retell that story, and that's the way the prince finds her. You know, if it wasn't for the story that lived on, she would never be reawoken. So anyway, memory and fairy tales, it gave me a lot in this book.
That is so fascinating. I mean, for me as a reader, one of the things I love about this book is I feel like the way you've structured it as a fairy tale, it does this incredible work of disarming me, where when I read the book for the first time, I loved the feeling of not realizing that I was reading about perhaps implications of capitalism or implications of the biopharmaceutical complex, until like it was like you had taken away my intellectual weapons, which was such a good feeling. I felt like I could see them more clearly. I could see the weird, porous intersections of those worlds so much more clearly by the work you did to disarm me. It was just so seductive. Okay, my next question. In this book, there is a miracle drug that has the ability to stop someone from aging and to stop them from feeling pain. Small spoiler, there are lots of like really bad side effects. Don't take the drug. Okay. And I think one of the amazing things that this book is doing is asking how the painful things in our lives makes us who we are, and how the ability to feel emotional and physical pain is one of the things that perhaps defines us as humans. How were you thinking about pain specifically while writing? And are there other books or fairy tales about pain and how it exists? So you've spoken about memory, how it exists in our memory that inspired you.
Yeah, the pain kind of came from the memory. I think the procedure to end aging, it sort of seemed like if there were such a thing, it would not come without a trade-off, you know. And what does aging bring to us? It brings us a lot of pain, and so those things, it seemed like maybe the same cure would take away both but at great costs that are perhaps not worth it. Don't take the drug.
Yeah, don't take it, guys.
So yeah, I think it's one of those things. I guess it's one of those things that pain is such a negative feeling, and you don't want to feel it. But to not feel it is to like lose an aspect of humanity. And what is joy without? That feels like such a cliche thing to say, but I do think it's true. You know, like what is the purpose of joy? If you never feel pain, I think you would have a dulled sensation of that as well. And the procedure stopping time also, like time is the way through which we experience our past, and one of the side effects is on memory. So I do those three prongs, time and memory and age, sort of like became very braided together and almost impossible for me to pull out at some points. And like I said, I wrote it as linked stories, so I kind of just followed each of those down their logical conclusions, and the pain became, the themes of pain became larger themes in some of the plot lines, in particular in one character's plot line. She's from a neighboring fictional island nation that has a long history of like basically a fictionalized opioid epidemic.
It's like it's an island that's like rich in this natural resource that people that live in the island realize has the ability to dull pain, but then it gets mined by this awful corporation, by all these bad actors, and wait, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Helpful context. Yeah, and it felt like if there were such a thing that could, and there are such things, right, that do take away our pain, and people are very drawn to them for very obvious and understandable and logical reasons, and then they have really horrific side effects and consequences, both on like a personal level and a societal level. And yeah, I mean, we've probably all seen this in some aspect of our lives. So I'm thinking about your question about, did I read anything? And I think it was less books that I was reading and more just the news that we've all been steeped in, you know, for decades now. And the way it has played out in real life definitely informed that sort of thing.
I'm so glad that you've touched on the different storylines, because okay, so for me this book is entrancing and web-like in a way that really reminded me of Zadie Smith's White Teeth, where there are all these groupings of characters living their separate lives, and then part of the joy of reading the book is seeing how their lives end up running up against one another and how they're all connected. And I loved all of the different threads, you know, each for unique reasons, perhaps especially the ones that were even circling Maeve, the girl who falls asleep. Specifically, I'm thinking about Syl and Abe, this couple, and also this incredible performance artist, Monique Gray, who like speaks out against this drug, but also uses it and does all these really interesting like artistic stunts by asking these philosophical questions that the book is also asking. So how did you conceive, so you've spoken a little bit about how the web of characters kind of came into play, perhaps because it was a linked story collection where they were interacting with one another, but were there certain storylines that came first and certain storylines that came later, and when did you realize that all of the characters were going to at some point join one another?
Yeah, I've never had the Zadie Smith comparison before, and I really like that because in White Teeth, I feel like you get the sense that she's having great fun doing it.
I also feel this reading your book.
I did have great fun. I mean, it was hard, but it was also sometimes really great fun to get to create these worlds and watch these people enter and leave each other's lives and impact them. It also was really helpful in a book about memory to get to see things from different people's eyes and get to sort of like question how things are remembered, or to the extent with which we can control what we remember that we might wish we could. And so, yeah, the structure was really helpful in those reasons, and also just a lot of fun for me. And I think partly I did it because I wanted to keep myself interested. I've never written something this long, and that was a really great trick to just be like, today I'm going to go back to this person's story because that's where I feel like being, and I never got bored. yeah, it was not without its challenges, but I never got bored writing it. So that's a pleasure. Yeah.
The feeling of reading it reminded me a little bit of that children's game of Sardines. Perhaps some of you played it, where it's no, oh my gosh, you haven't played
I
Sardines?
haven't played Sardines.
Great game. It's like hide and go seek in reverse, where one child goes and hides, and then all of the other children, and you have to hide in a big place because all the other children slowly join you, and then eventually the loser is the last person looking for the group. And I felt like the experience of reading the book was like, you're like, oh my gosh, these two characters are going to meet. And then they're all going to meet. You know, it's like waiting for them all to be in the same hiding place together. It was so beautiful.
I do have an answer to what I wrote first, which I think is maybe interesting, which is I wrote the Syl and Abe chapter first. So Syl and
That's
Abe,
fascinating.
yeah, Syl and Abe
Based
are,
on its place in the book.
yeah, it's very late in the book, or I guess midway really. They're a couple. They have a large gap of time between them. So he's 23 years older than her, and he decides to have this procedure. And their story is just sort of about what that would mean on any couple's life if there was. And she's very much against it. But I think in particular, with such a large gap of time between them, it just definitely reorients how she thought their life together was going to be. And anyway, I wrote that story, and I really thought I was writing a short story at that point. But Syl works as a news producer, and all of these people come through in that story. They all come through her newsroom for different reasons. So a performance artist comes through and is interviewed. This young widower comes through and is interviewed. She's like putting together this special broadcast about the Museum of Human History, and this museum owner comes through. And as I started writing it as linked stories, I just kept following all the different people who were in that one short story and kind of unpacking it that way. And then it became kind of like another conceit I was working with, where I can't remember if there was anyone who wasn't in that story that I like backed into. But like the weight of the twins was just that her son gets picked up by this girl and her grandfather, and that girl is one of the twins. So it was everybody is in there, but some of them just tangentially.
One of the things that I think is always really a good sign for me when I try and explain a book to a friend that I love is when I'm like, I can't tell you the plot. There's too much, it's not a good summary. There's too many people. It's a web. And that, I think that's my problem. But it is often how I, in recent weeks, have been talking about this book. That I feel like, you know, the narrative, like it is a girl, Maeve, who, for these specific reasons in this world, encounters unending sleep. But it's also about like all of these philosophical questions that are circling her, and these other people that are circling her. And I'm still practicing how to talk about it. Are there other?
Me too.
Are there other books that have a web-like structure that you love?
Yeah, there are many, and especially when over the course of restructuring it, I read a lot of like novels and short stories, or linked stories, or even just plain old novels, which this is now, which are kind of mosaic. Like Let the Great World Spin is my favorite. Love that book so much, so beautiful, and follows a lot of different characters. And a lot happens in that book, but also it's kind of about like the guy who walked a tightrope between the two twin towers.
Yeah.
But also like so many other things, right? Which like when I say that this book is about a girl who falls asleep and stops aging, that's true. But I also feel like that's only one of the things. It is hard. A Visit from the Goon Squad is another one.
Yeah, definitely. I think of you always as being in conversation with Jennifer.
Nice, I love that. Yeah, what are some of the other ones? Olive Kitteridge, but definitely more on like the short story side, but I feel like those are the three big ones. Yeah.
A somewhat related but slant question to that is that, okay, when I read this book, I immediately thought, finally, Helen Oyeyemi and Shelley Jackson finally have a peer. What other authors do you see this book in conversation with? So those are other books, the ones you just named, that are web-like. Mm-hmm. But what other authors do you feel like shelf next to?
Oh,
It's in my Oye, Me and Jackson section.
Yeah, I love that too.
Just so you know.
all of these are such great references. I just was thinking, Exit West.
Yes.
I think of that book often. The performance artist who is from this fictional nation with this fictional history. Like I in my memory of writing that chapter, I was reading that book at the same time, and it really captured my way in of writing a fictional place and its history. That's up there for me. I don't know. I think there's this book called The Dreamers by what is her name? She has 3 names. Walker, something Walker. It's a beautiful book. It's slipping my mind because I'm in front of you all right now. But it also is very philosophical and has to do with sleep. And so I didn't read it until late in the game here, but then when I did, I was like, oh, these books belong next to each other on a shelf. Aspirationally, maybe Emily St. John Mandel.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Station 11 was another one I reread a lot. And even did a lot of just paging through to remind myself, because there's like an interview in that book.
Also web-like.
Yeah, and it has some kind of found text, which this book also does.
Yeah.
Follows a lot of characters through a lot of time, and then they all do come together. So sometimes it feels like these are all aspirational, but they're my answers to the question.
No, I think they should be shelved together. I fully agree.
It would be very confusing if that was how bookstores were organized.
Can we? I think it's a great idea. I think the Exit West comparison is really, it really resonates with me, because I think that something that you do in this book that book also does is it takes this topic. I don't mean to, Rebekah, I don't mean to say that I'm pigeonholing this book at the Museum of Human History. It's only about the kind of bizarre, evil tentacles that is the biopharmaceutical complex. It's about so much more than that. Just I do believe that Exit West is a book that's about more than colonial wars. Mm-hmm. But the books are both circling these things that I, as just a byproduct of existing in the world that we all live in, have so much baggage around, because we're inundated with so much media about those things, that my experience of reading this book and also Exit West, it was this feeling of being able to encounter the evil and complexity of those worlds with new eyes, which was just so incredible. Okay, you've talked a little bit about how the book began as perhaps a linked collection of stories, but I'm interested to know more about how the book began. And I guess it's a process question, which I said I wasn't going to ask, but so goes. How long were you working on it when you, I don't know, a book is kind of like a body. When did it grow its arms and its legs? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm okay with the process question. I just sometimes feel like now that it is a book, it's hard to even remember, how did it get here? And
memory, what is it?
Memory, yeah, exactly. And
I don't have one. Yeah.
As I tell you this story, this is the story I'm telling about how it became a book. But I think it is true. I'm not trying to sit here and tell you a story, but yeah, in my memory of it all, I had the first pieces I actually wrote were in grad school, and they were just these vignettes about sisters, and sometimes they were twins, and sometimes they weren't twins, and sometimes they were named Evangeline and Maeve, and sometimes they weren't. And I didn't really know if they were anything, if they were little pieces of flash fiction or just these vignettes or sketches or what. And I think now that I do have these characters, it feels like that was my working my way towards them. And that for them and for those, I think I was just really interested in writing about childhood and sisterhood and feeling so close to somebody. And the 2 girls at the center of this are identical in almost every way. And then one of them is frozen in time and one of them goes on living her life. And yeah, so that period of being identical was perhaps the first thing I was interested in that became the book. The first time I sat down to try to write a novel, it was inspired by this true story from the city where I was born and lived until I was 11, where this girl had fallen into a coma when she was a toddler. And she was in a coma for the rest of her life, for decades actually. And people would come to her house and say that they were cured of various illnesses. And it was a media sensation. I had no idea. I was very young, like what was really going on in this house. And it was a very Catholic home. I was in a very Jewish home. People would kind of like talk about it as like this thing happening over there, but I didn't know what it was. And when I sat down to write it as a novel, like as that being the story, it just felt kind of wrong, and I didn't know how to write a novel at all. This girl story was not mine to tell. I didn't really ever understand it, and so I abandoned that, and I wrote Still an Abe story instead. And then I found my way back to those sisters, and then I found my way back to that coma, and then the coma became obviously not based on any kind of a true story, because that girl did grow older in her coma, and my girl does not, and a bunch of other things happen. But yeah, those were some of its origins. It took me, I started it 8 years ago now. And, there was a lot of life has happened in these last 8 years.
But the last, it takes so long to publish a book. I'm sure you all know this. The last, 3 years doesn't even count.
Yeah, maybe.
Because no, seriously, the publishers buy your book, at least 2 years ahead of time. It's been, but the book has been finished for a long time.
Yeah, so it took 7. I think conservatively it took me 7 years. Yeah.
What is time anyway?
What is time? But yeah, in the course of that time, we had a pandemic.
That doesn't count. I mean, time-wise, it counts for our lived experiences and pain and memory, obviously. But yeah. Got married, had a baby. I have changed so much, and so the book has changed form with me. I think to become what it became. Yeah. That is so. I'm fascinated hearing you talk about this. That the arguably the most fantastical element of this book was actually something just based in a lived reality. That there is this person who has continued to live on Earth without having what we would all of these other markers that we would consider of what living could or be or is alive. That's so interesting.
Also, as a character who is asleep and has other characters come to them. It was
very Brothers Grimm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, another question. How has your past as an editor at Noon and the many other wonderful literary journals you've worked at influenced your writing of this book? We have another acclaimed Noon editor in the audience with us, Liza St. James. Do you feel like it? How has it influenced you as both a writer or maybe not at all?
Oh no, definitely. So Noon is this beautiful literary anthology that comes out annually, founded by Diane Williams, who we have all three of us worked closely with, who is a brilliant writer and editor, who is just has such a clear-eyed vision and ear for what is sonically a good sentence. And so that, having worked with her and seeing her do the work of editing a 4-page story down to a single sentence, and then ask to publish it because that was the sentence at the heart of the story, was sometimes really empowering and sometimes really paralyzing while writing, because I was really attracted to writing at the sentence level throughout this whole book, and it's hard to it's just a balance of how to make things happen while also writing, sentences that please the ear. So I would say the attention to the sentence was one enormous way. Reading things out loud is a Noon tradition, and something I incorporated in my revision process a bit too. Read chunks of this book quite a lot. The pieces that are in here that have been in here the longest, I feel are lodged in my brain.
I can hear it. All of your sentences please me. Rebekah, what are you reading right now? What other books have you read recently that you loved? If you could make every person who left tonight here at Green Apple buy a companion book to your book, not that it would necessarily have to be shelved next to your book, but it's you are the book fascist who's when you leave this bookstore, you also have to purchase this other book. What would it be? because you'll obviously also be buying this book, so that's a given. But in addition,
this book of stories called Belly Up.
No, they all already own it.
Aside from Belly Up, I don't know. I don't want to dictate what people buy because you're all your own readers. But for me, I will give you an answer. Kelly Link has a new collection stories.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. It's called White Cat, Black Dog. And there are 8 fairy tale retellings. And the way Kelly Link retells a fairy tale is so different from the way that if you think that I've retold a fairy tale the way that I've done it. And I just love the way she just like turns them inside out and then back in again. And each one is really different. There's like a sci-fi Hansel and Gretel. There's like the title or the first story is this like sort of like takedown of the ultra rich, and it's really clever and really smart and a delight. So yeah, White Cat, Black Dog by Kelly Link. What I'm reading right now, I've been reading a lot of debut novels. I think I've been on a kick of that. I flew here from the East Coast and I started this book by Molly Lynch called The Forbidden Territory of a Terrifying Woman, which is a lovely title but a long one, and I keep forgetting it a little bit every time. But so far it's extraordinary. Yeah, really, really good. I also, not in the debut novel world, but I can't stop talking about Elizabeth McCracken's latest novel that came out, I think, last year. It's called The Hero of this book.
I have to read it. I haven't read it.
It's like maybe the best like autofiction I've ever read. I just think it's
wow.
Really, and
there's so much out there.
I know.
There's
well,
so
maybe
much
not
autofiction.
Okay, I don't want to like maybe not the best, but the best out there. She's such a good sentence writer and such a good storyteller, and I laughed and I cried, and it's really, really beautiful, and it's a lot about like grief, but also like there's a lot to kind of like love and delight in, and I love a small book. It's a nice small novel.
How will I ever pick when I leave the bookstore? Okay, I have one more question for Rebekah, and then, lest I remind you, it's time for audience Q&A, and this is not a normal Q&A because there are prizes, and I'm gonna have to model the prize. Forgive me. It's like, yeah, keep thinking of your questions. Well, I mean, have you seen this pin? It's so beautiful. It's incredible. It's like an Art Deco little work of art, and it can be yours if you ask the question. So think of one. Okay, my last question for you, Rebekah, is I feel like this book has such an intense sense of place, but I'm not sure where the place is. There are all these really like very, very vivid descriptions of this island nation that, to my knowledge, doesn't exist in real life. A lot of like coastal city towns in some ways maybe feel like we're in New Jersey, but maybe they're not at all. And like some scenes where I feel like I'm in summer on the East Coast, but I'm not sure. How did place play into the world of this book, or not?
Yeah. So the island nation is fictional, but the city of Marks Island City is, I feel like, an amalgamation of many places, but heavily drawn from the town where I moved when I was 11, which is on the North Shore of Massachusetts.
Wow.
And yeah, the kind of rocky coastline. There's this one town that juts out into the water, and it's this peninsula, and there was like a man-made causeway made into the town, and everybody who lived in that town has like all this town pride. But in 6th grade, they're not big enough for a middle school, so they all came to our middle school, and we were kind of like flooded with these people from this like town that's kind of right there, but feels really far away, and it's like definitely they like pride themselves on not being from our town. They're this tiny little island town. And my mom, for a long time, the scene that I read with the boats, my mom for a long time lived on a hill where you had this view of what is called Fisherman's Beach, and the boats would come out every season. So that was one of those pieces that was definitely from the like early vignettes of Sisterhood, and the town sort of came from there.
You know what I'm realizing is I was in conversation a few weeks ago with Rachel Henn, who wrote this beautiful novel, The Great Reclamation. Add it to your list tonight, and which is also, it's also, it's about kind of the development. It's about many things. It's about the development of the city of Singapore, and also has these magical realism elements. And I'm realizing that both of these novels feel so coastal to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like the water is this it has this like feeling or texture in the book that I love. As someone who is from the San Francisco Bay Area, obviously we're here. I feel like we also have this feeling of water. Person, I don't know if it's a Long Island person. You are like, oh, I know that feeling. Okay, guys, the time is here to join this beautiful. I just love these pins so much. Who has an audience question? Liza. Oh, sorry. Sorry, that was too enthusiastic.
Give me a second. I can. Okay, please. Well, thank you both for this amazing conversation, and Rebekah, it was such a treat to get to hear you read aloud. My question, I have a process question that I really wanted to ask, but I'm gonna put it on hold. In lieu of asking about the found text. Can you say any more about the found text in the book, or just the idea even of taking something so like concretely real from the
This
real
is
world?
fascinating me, Liza. I didn't realize there was found text in the book.
Well, it's not found text is the wrong word. It's invented text that is found in the world of the book, right? So that like news. There's
say more.
Yeah. So there's. But I'm happy to speak to that. I misspoke when it's found within the world of the novel. So there's a press release that's written into the book. There is, and congrats on your pen. There are a few news articles. There's a list of headlines that one of the characters has collected, which is like printed into the book. I think that's it. Oh, there's an art review of one of the performance art.
Love that art review.
Yeah. So, and that also a little bit was like, let me not get bored writing something longer than 1,000 words a bit. And then also sometimes I turned to that. I was really interested in playing with like narrative distance throughout writing this book. I feel like there's like an aspect of the fairy tale in that, of like looking at your characters from a great remove sometimes. And sometimes I even use those newspaper articles as like the main tragedy of the story. This girl falling into a coma is not seen in scene. It is written as a newspaper article. So that idea of like removing yourself sort of from the scene and just presenting it was something I was playing with. But there are also like a few different kind of, I think, like mysteries that the reader is trying to piece together as they read, and those fictional found texts, we might call them, are like clues a little bit as well.
Another question. Yeah.
So you kept referring to sentence writers, and I was like wondering what that was. And then like, is that like a specific like subcategory of writing or like a type of style?
Yeah, I don't know that it's like a real term, but it's just, I think of it as stories. And the question, sorry, I should repeat the question. The question was, I kept talking about sentence writers, and is that a type of writer, like a style? I think there's a type of, just stylistically, a type of writer who is attentive to like the way the sentence sounds or the surprise of a sentence. I think of like Gary L. Lutz as somebody who's very much a sentence writer.
Her seminal essay, the sentence is
Yes.
a lonely place. It's like
a good place to start.
It's like this manifesto about the sentence that just, it's so good.
Yeah. How to use words and in a particular order to surprise or delight or
Did Vicky now write a story titled In Noon? Oh, what was the title? I wrote a sentence and the sentence was Gary L. Lutz.
Yes,
Yeah.
I wrote a sentence. Yeah.
There is like this kind of cohort of writers who are these like sentence extremists who they're just seductive because they're just the way they talk about the form of the sentence, you're just like, I will do anything you tell me. Like, I'm not describing this very well.
Yeah, I feel like Gary L. Lutz's The Sentence is a Lonely Place. It's an essay that describes what we're talking about better than
It's a believer essay.
Yes.
I work at that magazine.
I also think Amy Hempel is a short story writer who manages to be both a phenomenal story writer and phenomenal sentence writer. Not to say that these sentence writers aren't both, but I think of her in like firmly in both categories.
Yeah.
And she was, I think, my first favorite writer. Like once I wanted to be a writer. And she's just a really great writer all around.
You're making me want to write it'd be a bad idea probably to commit it to paper, but these are the people I think are sentenced to extremists.
Mhm.
Make a little list. And such a good question.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, Francis.
Sorry. Becca, you've spent 7 years with these characters, and now you've shared them with the world. If you could wave a magic wand and bring any of them to life and have dinner with one of them,
Whoa,
which would it be? What do you think you might talk about?
Oh, that question.
Ask them.
I don't know.
I have never heard that question asked before at a
Yeah.
book reading. It's such a good question.
His question was if I could wave a wand and bring one of my characters to life and talk to them or have dinner with them, who would it be? People have asked me less delightful versions of that question, like what's your favorite, and I have a kind of a non-answer, which is I don't have one favorite, but I feel like that's not an answer to this question. There's a character named Tess who I just think is maybe that means she is my favorite character, and I've been too afraid to say it. I don't know, but she finds out she's dying. She's very young, and she just kind of decides to live her life and just do all the things she wants to do. And she comes to this very quick acknowledgement of nobody ever has enough time. So that's so kind of what's the big deal? I'm just gonna fill my life with the time that I have as much as I can.
One of my favorite things Tess does as a character is she starts referring to her. She has a coworker that's also named Tess, but she starts referring to herself as Dying Tess, which makes everyone super uncomfortable because everyone knows she's a terminal disease. It's really funny.
Yeah, she has this really great. I think a great sense of humor about.
She's do you mean regular Tess or Dying Tess? And they're I meant Dying Tess.
And she also eats all these hot dogs, and she's just I can eat hot dogs now. Who cares what's inside of them? So she finds a lot of joy and in the time that she has, and
her partner's really frustrated by it.
Yeah.
And is in end grief stages for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I feel she comes to a conclusion that almost every other character is fighting against for a long time, and so it would be interesting to have a chat with her, and maybe even get her to help some of the other folks in the book, which she does, but maybe even more.
Perhaps 1 or 2 more audience questions. Oh, well, yeah. The sweater. Second row in the sweater.
Me.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I was wondering what grew you to the sort of fairy tale structure of the novel.
Yeah, the question was what drew me to the fairy tale structure. It seemed just logical, and I think it's just because when I was searching for the structure that might bring these linked stories together, fairy tales were kind of the first thing that came to my mind, and I think it's because I was such a fairy tale, and am still, Kelly Link being my answer to that question. Before fairy tale retellings, they've kind of always been my favorites. They're the first stories I remember. The first story I ever remember writing in elementary school was this weird fairy tale crossover where all the characters were in each other's stories, and it was weird. But so when I was looking for the frame to hang all these stories upon, it felt the first place I looked was fairy tales, and then finding Sleeping Beauty, it felt kind of serendipitous. The Briar Rose, yeah.
Such a strange story, Sleeping Beauty.
It's a weird one.
Which the absurdity of it, I feel like the novel really brings out. It's such a conceit of the whole thing. It's so weird.
They're all weird.
They're all weird.
Fairy tales are weird, and they're so dark, and they're so much darker, I think, than we often remember. And then when we read these, the grim version of them, as the Grimms recorded them, they're very dark. Yeah.
I believe we had one more question far in the back.
Okay, so it's season 4 of Real Housewives of Museum of Human History and Test. No, just kidding. To maybe build on Rita's last question about place, sceness, and as a guy that my job is museum of a place.
Yeah.
And forgive me if you already talked about this because I was putting my baby to bed in a place where she would be safe for the first quadrant of this event tonight. what is the word museum? I mean, I found that the title is like really funny, and I feel like it doesn't bode well for like the virtue of museum. Like if Ken does beach, and like if Ken were to do museum, like it would be unvirtuous. But like, is music? I don't know. Like, what are your? How did it end up in the title? Do you find hope in the notion of museum, or you just find like structural systemic violence and like despair?
So okay, I'm gonna rephrase that question. Okay, so I think the question is, I think the question is, how did you come to the title? As someone who works in a museum,
Interviewer.
Yeah.
you have a title, it's an amazing title, the Museum of Human History, which feels like this amazing conundrum that seems impossible. Like, how can you have a single place to monument all the pain and joy and suffering and love and art and accomplishment and failure that all of humanity has ever done? You can't. So how did you find the title? What does the title mean to you?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a good summary of the meaning of the title, right? Like this attempt to encapsulate all of this history in one building it's going to be a failed attempt, but we're going to try anyway, right? And that's, I talked in the beginning about fairy tales as like fairy tales as the bit of the past that's preserved, and maybe it's not the real past, but it's the story we're going to tell about it, and thank God we have it, because otherwise we'd have nothing. And so without the Museum of Human History, we wouldn't have any human history at all, right? So it can't capture it all, but it will try. And on another note, I also was just once I found that title, I was pretty committed to it, because I like a title that's sort of instructive to how to read the book, or that maybe like points to what a book can be. I think of like Ramona Acebel's A Guide to Being Born, which is both the name of one of the stories in that collection, but also like the book perhaps could be thought of as a guide. Or my professor I had in grad school wrote a book, Tiffany Unique, called How to Escape from a Leper Colony, which I think like speaks to how to read the book, right? And I like the thought of this book as kind of similar to a museum, in that there's different exhibits you can go visit. There's different like lives you can spend some time with, but also there's this overarching experience of being in the place. And my hope, especially in that move from stories to novel, was that the whole would become bigger than the sum of its parts. And so I hope that title kind of points you in that direction, that it's one thing that encapsulates many things.
Rebekah, it has been such a joy to be in conversation with you
Rita.
here
Thank you,
this
everyone.
evening for your absolutely stunning and beautiful novel. Thank you so much for being with us in Car. Thank you so much for having us. I'm going to go buy Museum of Human History and a few other books. Probably, I am so ashamed to admit I have not yet read the new Kelly Link.
Wow.
Tonight is my night.
Yeah.
I think I'm also gonna buy. Oh, there's so much other good stuff. I'm probably also gonna buy Dean Rader's Cy Twombly book, and probably some other things too. I'll see you at the register. All right. Okay.
You're doing great. I'm sorry.
Okay. No.
Thank you all so kindly for joining us. Can we give one more hand for thank you so much. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you for being so generous in your question answering and in your question asking, Rita, and all of you as well. I'm so glad you were incentivized by the team. We, like Rita said, we have copies of Rebekah's book at the front. We also have a couple copies of Rita's book as well. Can I make one more museum book recommendation?
Yeah.
I think we have it. One of my favorite books of all time is a book called The Museum of Unconditional Surrender by DeRocco Gressick.
I don't know it. Oh
I'll
my
try
gosh.
and find it. I'll put it at the register.
Love
and
that.
fight over it. But thank you all so much for joining us. Get comfortable. Stick around. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.